Hello and welcome to the 5 Yard Dynasty podcast. I hope you're all doing well. Liam, we had quite possibly the best weekend of football. I think certainly in my lifetime, I've never known anything like it. As a Packers fan, I'm sure you'll agree that it was truly spectacular.
It was not spectacular at all as a Green Bay fan, but I can tell as a football fan in general, it was a great weekend. All games came down to the final 13 seconds of regulation. Absolutely insane. Fortunately, I did go to sleep at halftime during the Bills-Chiefs game, and that was the boring half, which was surprising. Yeah, I'm not going to go too far into the Packers because I'm sure our guest will be bringing it up just to rub my nose in it a little bit with his fandom.
I love that you can tell you're a man that doesn't have kids, that you're able to stay up for the half time the Chiefs Bills game, because I was certainly in bed well before then. But as Liam alluded to, we have got another fantastic guest joining us today. So we're joined by Evan Brown, who some of you may know as at FF Evolution. He is a writer and ranker at Dynasty Nerds and host of the Dynasty Debates podcast. Evan, how are you doing?
I am fantastic. Thanks very much for having me on here, fellas.
No, thank you very much for coming on. It's lovely to have you. I hope I didn't butcher your Twitter handle. I was listening to your podcast and it was saying at FF Evolution, as in
nailed it, as Andy Bernard would say.
Absolutely. So yeah, Evan, I mean, what did you make of the divisional round? It was pretty spectacular.
It was the weekend of football that we needed, not the weekend of football that we deserved. It was glorious. It was magnificent. It was all of the delightful adjectives you can think of to describe something that is glorious. I was heartbroken for the Bills. I did stay up till 3 a.m. watching it. I was sorry the next day, but it was worth it. It was totally worth it. It was the first time, I don't know about you fellas, but it was the first time where the whole weekend of football was amazing for different reasons. The Titans Bengals was like horrific. It was like a train wreck you didn't want to look away from, and you were just like, how can Burrow be sacked so many times and still get up? And then they managed to pull the win out, and that was pretty crazy and pretty amazing. And then obviously, without getting too deep into it, making Liam cry, the Packers meltdown was pretty incredible. And Aaron Rodgers losing is always something I'm excited for as a Vikings fan. So that was great. And then, you sort of go in, and I don't know about you guys, but it's so funny because the Bucs and Rams was an incredible game. And now you kind of don't even remember it. You just completely go straight to the Bills and Chiefs, because that was an insane game. I mean, this is one thing I took away from it, is I just love how momentum plays such a huge part in sports, and people don't realize that. You went into halftime and you were like, oh man, they can just mail this in the second half. Like, they can just walk home, and like, this is easy. And we were kind of making jokes about 28-3 and all this, 27-3. It's going to be, you never know, ha ha ha. And I don't think anybody actually thought that they could come back, but it was as if Tom Brady and his 743-year-old self had conjured up a curse on the Rams for the second half, because everything that could go wrong went wrong. Everybody was fumbling, missing kicks, turnover on. I mean, it was just unbelievable. It was like, this is not the same team that we watched, but they somehow managed to pull it out of the bag at the last minute, which I was really happy for Stafford. I love Stafford. I think he's one of the most underrated quarterbacks, but apologies for going long-winded, but it was just such an amazing weekend. I felt like, when you ever watch those old NFL games from the catch or, this, that, and the other, and it's like, these are the classic games, that defined an era. I felt like for the first time, I was like, you know what? People are going to be talking about this game and this weekend 15, 20 years from now, and they're going to be like, this was two Titans at the height of their powers and all this kind of stuff. It just felt like I'm living in history right now, and it was fantastic. I loved every minute of it, except for the part where the Bills lost, but that was sad. Yeah. But other than that, it was fantastic.
It was honestly mental. I went to bed after the Rams-Bucks game, and I said to my wife as I was coming to bed, I said, I think that's one of the best games I've ever watched. That's definitely top 3. And then I woke up in the morning, watched the Bills Chiefs game, was like, oh my God, this was even better. It was absolutely mental. Just an incredible weekend of insane football. And Liam, And before we dive into your cocktail of the week, I know you're itching. So Evan, we'd like to do a little bit of an introduction to those of our listeners that have not heard of or read your work. So how did you kind of get into fantasy football, being from over on these shores? Did you get in young? Is it something recent that you've dived into? Or?
Well, it's really weird. I was actually talking earlier about it's such a weird, like, I feel like a 1950s comic book supervillain with a very convoluted and unbelievable backstory. So I'm even though my family's history and lineage is from over here, and I've lived over here my whole adult life, I was actually born in Alaska, believe it or not. So I was born in Alaska in a small town and spent all of my like childhood over there. So that's where I sort of, grew up around American football. And, even though Alaska doesn't have its own sports team, like a professional sports team, I obviously grew up in that culture and understanding it. And my dad was really into American football and things like that. So that's where I sort of got into American football and understanding it. And then I've lived here, like I say, since I was like 20 years old. So I lived pretty much like 50% of my life here. So like probably US born and bred and then like honorary Irish or something. I don't know. But that's where I sort of got the background, the knowledge of it. But as far as getting into fantasy, it's really interesting because I never really played fantasy football for ages. And then probably about 10 years ago, I actually got into FPL, so Fantasy Premier League. And this is just through some guys at work, and they were sort of like talking to me about it. And I'm a QPR fan, for those of you who might know who they are. Potential promotion again this year. But at the time, I remember we were in the Premier League, and so I was able to get like Charlie Austin and stuff like that on my like FPL squad, and I was enjoying that. And that was really fun the first year. And then I started getting a bit bored of it the second year. I was like, it's just a bit samey. Like everybody's got the same players and everything. Everyone's kind of got the same strategy, and it just kind of feels meh. So I started digging into it a bit, and then found out about like Unique Draft FPL and stuff like that. So there was an old platform called Toga back then and stuff, and we used to play some guys from work, and we would start drafting, and I was like, this drafting thing's really great. And then some guys at work just happened to mention NFL. They're like, have you ever played fantasy NFL? And it just like a light bulb moment went off in my head, and I was like, fantasy NFL, why didn't I think of that? And so I went and did redraft for a few years, and really enjoyed it. But just because of my personality and like just being addictive and just liking to go down the rabbit hole and learn more, and I always hated the element of like drafting this team and trading and working the waiver wire and building this great team, getting to the playoffs, and then like just starting all over from scratch again the next year. So after a few years, I just decided redraft wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. It was just the gateway drug. And so I got into Dynasty, and I just was hooked ever since. So that's kind of the weird evolution. It's like I got from soccer into American football, even though American football would have been something I would have been more familiar with growing up, as a kid and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. Sort of a back to front.
I think that's, to be honest, how most people go from redraft to Dynasty, isn't it? Is that kind of want for more and for the off season.
Yeah, yes. The off season's very long for a redraft player.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then how did you make that jump from kind of playing to kind of producing content?
Yeah, well, that's another weird story as well, to be fair. So I played there for a few years, and I just really, really enjoyed it. And I'm one of those people that have got into content creating just because I love the game, you know what I mean? Not because I'm like, I'm gonna be rich and famous, I'm gonna be the next, whoever or whatever. It's just because I really love the game, and it was just looking at, that's sort of why I got from redrafting to Dynasty, and then from Dynasty sort of just started learning more. And it was really funny because it was in my kind of never-ending quest of knowledge and learning more and getting more into it that I eventually knocked on the door of IDP a little bit, because I didn't really know anything about IDP. It wasn't really, because I don't know about you guys, but in Dynasty, I don't like to play team defense. I just don't like it. I don't like the
no kickers, no defense.
The way it's variable year to year. You can have a great defense one year and then they suck. And just anyways, but some people were talking to me about IDP, and I was like, okay, I'll try it, pretty much try anything once. And so I went and started trying IDP, and it was through that I was actually trying to learn about it. So I was reading up and listening to some podcasts, and there was a certain podcast I was listening to. It was the IDP show now, it's called. And it was just funny because I was chatting to a couple of guys that are co-hosts on the show on Twitter, funny enough. And I ended up chatting through DMs on one of the guys and just asking him some questions about some players and trying to get some idea of strategy and things like that. And he's a Vikings fan as well. So we started commiserating about our years of pain and loneliness and, lack of championship trophies and things like that. And I just happened to sort of say, almost in an offhand way, I was like, oh, I really love the podcast. You guys are doing a great job. And, I'd love to do that someday, maybe just that'd be cool and everything. And he was just like, well, you should do it. I was like, okay, you think so? And he's like, yeah, you seem knowledgeable. You seem like, you know what you're talking about and like you're passionate about it. He's like, just go for it. You don't have to be qualified. Like there's no qualification for it. Right. Okay. I don't know how to do that. And then I'd actually been following Garrett Price over at Dynasty Nerds for a while at that stage. They were one of the first Dynasty podcasts that I started listening to, Dynasty Nerds. And it was just really random. I just sort of like, oh, I don't know what to do here. So I just dropped into his DMs and kind of gave him like a pitch of like, hey, I honestly, I wasn't trying to get involved with Dynasty Nerds or anything. I was just actually trying to pick his brain as somebody I respected in the industry. And I was like, hey, could you maybe just make 10 minutes to chat to me sometime about how you got into it and what your process and journey was? And he was just really gracious with chatting to me. And he literally made time to actually have a conversation with me and stuff. And we had our first conversation, and it was so funny because at the end of it, he was just like, I think, yeah, would you like to come and do some writing for us? And I was like, let me think about it. And had just that real like imposter syndrome at the time, like, oh, I'm not qualified for this, or I never played in the NFL or whatever, like as if anybody who very few people who create content for fantasy have actually played even college football, let alone NFL. But in your mind you're thinking all those things. So anyways, long story short, he just was like, yeah, come on. So I did it. And then that's where it started. Just started writing a couple articles and started doing more and more of that, and spent some time in the space on Twitter, getting to know people and things, and then started doing ranking for them as well. And I'd always sort of wanted to do a podcast, but I'd always been waiting. And then I just, again, decided like, why am I waiting? I just need to go for it. So I started the debates this year during the season when the season week 1 started. So yeah, apologies for long-winded answers. I have the gift of the gab, as they like to say over here. So I needed to learn to shut up.
No, I love it. I think that's it, is that a lot of people that make that jump into content creation, it's nobody sort of, you're almost taking that big hurdle with that first step, and it feels so massive, doesn't it, to start doing it? But actually, I'd encourage anybody to reach out to people to just start writing, because I think, I absolutely love it, and it's something I basically spend every minute of every day thinking about. And
yes. Warning, you can lose your social life if you get into it too much.
Exactly that. Go on then, Liam. I know you're dying. You can lead us away with your cocktail of the week. I hope you got something special.
Well, I don't know how I'm going to follow up that whole spiel about the fantasy football evolution, because this is a very small cocktail. It's literally a shot glass.
That's not a cocktail. That's a shot.
You can have a cocktail shot.
You could make about 6 of them, and then you could call it a cocktail.
I have done that before. But this is a paradise morning. I've never had it before, so this is going to be the first time. It's pineapple juice and amaretto. I'll tell you how it is at the end of the stream, because I don't know when I'm going to have it.
So what you're saying is you're going to shot it at some point during the stream.
So if your face goes really funny, it's not because you're annoyed at what we're saying, basically.
Yeah, if I run off, it's probably because I'm going to throw up or something.
Lovely.
Do it on live stream. That would be good quality. Quality video.
It's all about the content.
Quality content.
Right, let's move on from that. So the significant news this week, Rich did remove this section. I'm not going to let him get away with it, because there's always significant news. So he removed it, and then within the last 2 hours from recording, we had Sean Payton retire, or step away from the game, as people are saying. So that's going to be another head coaching position available. And then some Vikings news for you, Evan. I'm sure you've already seen. So the Bears and the Vikings have both hired a GM, and they are 2 names that I have never heard of before. So take that for what you will, but I'm not that clued into the GM circles. So, Evan, I don't know how involved you are with the GM hire or anything along those lines. Do you have any pearls of wisdom, or are you just waiting to see what happens?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you sort of always knows the really high level names, don't you? Like the Gettlemans and the guys that you don't want, and the guys that you're worried about getting. The guy that we've ended up going with here, I know a little bit about, but I really need to dig in more. I am at first blush, I am happy and excited about the signing. He's only, I believe, 40, so it's nice to have someone that's young, someone hopefully forward thinking. My understanding is that he's quite analytically driven, which I like. I'm a big fan of like Staley and what he's doing at the Chargers and things like that. So I know he's got a background in sort of like Wall Street and things like that, which I think is really good, because an interesting thing I sort of dug into last year and this year a little bit in the offseason is just the fact that I think we sort of have this misunderstanding that like to be a good GM, you need to be a football person, like as in you need to have played football at a high level and stuff. But there's quite a few different ways that you can tackle it. And there's a lot of different ways that a GM can run an organization. And ultimately the GM is first and foremost responsible for the business side of it. So you actually want someone who's a good business mind and knows what they're doing. And if they are good at like scouting and that's their background and things, that's brilliant. But if not, they can kind of like, move that on to other people and stuff like that. So, I mean, what I understand about him is he's analytically driven. He's spoken of very highly within the organization. I believe he was sort of headhunted away from the 49ers, which is an organization that I think is a really well-run organization in general. So again, I sort of think of a lot of the different teams as almost like these different businesses, and some are run really poorly like the Jaguars, and some are run very well like the Steelers and 49ers and places like that. So I like his pedigree. I need to dig in a bit more, but at first blush, like I said, I am encouraged by it. This is breaking news to me though. I don't even know who the Bears have signed. Like, do you guys know the name, or who is it?
It was Ryan Poles, wasn't it?
Yes.
Oh, no way, was it? See, I wanted Ryan's, for us, so I'm a bit gutted there. Because I think he was somebody I was really excited about coming from the Chiefs.
Not to be confused with Ryan Pace, who was the ex-GM. So
yes. Maybe he showed back up with a fake mustache and like Dwight trying to get the job for the manager.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was you guys were down to the final two, and then I think the Bears hired Ryan Poles, which kind of made your decision up for you.
Yeah, we were supposed to have like a second interview with him tomorrow, I believe. So they must have just made him an offer he couldn't refuse.
Yeah,
and, which is sad. I was really excited about him, but that's really good for them, which sucks for us because same division. But yeah, exciting times.
Absolutely.
Right,
should we dive into the bulk of the show then, Liam?
Yeah, because normally we run over, so I have a feeling that this podcast is going to be the exact same. It's not your fault, Evan. We talk way too much as well. That's why we started a podcast. So, as the previous weeks, we've been doing the Dynasty positional review, and this week we are doing the quarterback position. So, just for those that may be listening for the first time, we go through the top 12 scorers from this year, and we'll take a look at the end of any people that we want to maybe take a look at because their points per game were high and they finished in the top 12 that way, or they were a surprise finisher outside the top 12. So, Evan, first of all, Josh Allen, who had an amazing game, and again, you feel sorry for him, we feel sorry for him. I'm pretty sure everyone in the football community that isn't a Chiefs fan feels sorry for him at this point.
I didn't, I'd like to say, as a Jets fan, I was very pleased.
The massive boos for Rich. Let's kick him out of the stream. So, Evan, he finished as the QB1 this year. He was drafted as the QB2 in ADP in August, and he's also going as the QB2 in January ADP, both from DLF. So, in back-to-back years as QB1, where do you have him ranked? What do you feel about him, especially with his contract situation? He's not a free agent until 2029.
For me personally, it was only literally like last week, I think, where I moved him officially to my QB1 in Dynasty. I'd had Mahomes there, and I think it was partly just, I think the two are fairly interchangeable. Like, if you want to argue that Mahomes is the QB1, I'm not going to fight you on that. But for me, it was just Josh Allen's one of those feel-good stories where I always liked him as a prospect, and I was really high on him. I got a lot of Josh Allen, thankfully, in Dynasty between his sort of rookie and sophomore years, where people were sort of down on him because of his incompletions, his interceptions, things like that. They're like, oh, he's a bum. He can run. That's about it. I just really liked him. I sort of believed in him, and I believed in, again, what we're talking about like earlier, the GM. I liked the whole setup. I felt like, okay, these guys really believe in him. They traded up to get him. Looks like they're going to build around him. I like them as GM and head coach and stuff, so I kind of bought into the whole thing. So for me, it's just been a really fun journey to watch him from being somebody that a lot of people didn't even think was going to be a starter to now being not necessarily everyone's QB1, but I think very few people are going to have him outside the top 3 or 4. So I don't think you can go wrong either way, him or Mahomes. I love Josh Allen. I love his swag. I love just who he is as a person. I love his humor. I just think he's an amazing player. I mean, I don't know if you did get to see the game, man. I couldn't believe, I don't know how you can not love the guy, even if you're a Jets fan, Rich. Come on, have a heart. I mean, the guy, when he led them down and they went up with 13 seconds left, did you see him on the sideline just screaming and shouting and just getting his defense all psyched up and everything? And he just leads by example. He puts his whole heart into what he does, which is something that can't be said for, maybe players like Aaron Rodgers and stuff like that, which, can be that bit of a, they have that bit of a vibe where it's hard to like them sometimes. You like the talent, you respect the talent, but Josh just seems like a genuinely good person. Same with Mahomes, to be fair. But yeah, I'm all aboard the Josh Allen hype train.
I think Rich, go for it, Rich.
I think for me, I was one of those people that was very low on Josh Allen. I wasn't a believer. I didn't believe that accuracy could improve from college to the pros and from year 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. I think outside of Josh Allen, that's pretty much been proved to be true. But credit to him, he's the exception to the rule. Much like you, I had Mahomes at 1 up until I think probably about 6 weeks ago. I finally bumped Josh Allen ahead. I think it's hard not to. He's tied into a fantastic franchise, as you mentioned. He offers the rushing upside that fewer quarterbacks seem to have done over the last year. And when a guy's young, tied into the situation, got good weapons around him, and he's back-to-back years as QB1, for me, it's hard to rank him anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm with you, but I do have him as QB2. I think
you're not with us. Then you're not with us.
No, I'm with you in the fact that they are very interchangeable, and it's basically a coin flip for me. The only reason I've got Mahomes as 1 is the contract situation, if anything, and that's saying something. I mean, there's 3 years apart on their contracts, and that's about it. But that's if you're playing Dynasty for the next 10 years. I think realistically, it comes down to the type of team or the type of league format that you play in. If you play in a 6-point league, then Mahomes is my unquestioned quarterback 1. But then if it's a 4-point touchdown for throwing and then 6 points rushing, you've got more of a case for me to put Allen. And I think it's a coin flip. If I'm picking at 102, I'm not unhappy with either of those. And I'd probably be more glad that I'm picking at 102 because I don't want to pick out of either of those. So moving on to
understate how he was back-to-back QB1s as well. I think he's the first time that's happened since 2012, 2013 with Drew Brees. So for first time in the last decade, someone has repeated as the QB1, which has always been a knock on people that finishes QB1 because people are like, oh, well, not going to repeat is that. And it's not to say he'll be the QB1 again next year, but to Rich's point, I think he adds such a solid baseline with the rushing that then when he does have those blow up games of the 4 touchdowns, it's hard to say no.
I'm not going to argue with you about him being QB1 or QB2. Again, coin flip, they're in a tier of their own. Moving on to the finisher of QB2, that was Justin Herbert this year. He was going as QB6 in August ADP, and he rose to QB3 as of today, basically. Is he the next Mahomes, Rich? I don't know where you want to go with this because you put this in the show sheet. But,
I think basically, I think both you and I, Liam, probably need to hold our hands up. We did a podcast back in August talking about potential overpriced players, and I seem to remember us both saying that Justin Herbert as QB6 was outrageous. He was closer to 12 than the top 5, and we couldn't see how he'd have a world where he could produce because he didn't offer that elite rushing upside, and I didn't think he'd have the high-powered enough offense to get there. But, happy to hold my hands up and say I was very wrong. I know that I think basically some of the stats are hinting that his age, his production, it's Mahomesian. For me, I think that the QB2 on the season, I don't know if I fully buy into it. I think we've seen him do that in a year where Lamar, Kyla have both been injured. I think Mahomes has, had a down year with a lot of teams playing that cover 2 shell. And I think that for me, QB2, QB3 is still too rich for me. I'd be much happier taking him outside what I've got as an Elite Four. And I think he'd still be my QB5. I kind of hope that's not take lock, and I hope that I am going into it with an open mind. But I don't know, Evan. Do you agree with me, or are you a Herbert believer?
I'm gonna have to unfortunately disagree with you. I have him as my QB3 in Dynasty, so right behind the top two there. I don't think he's quite at that level yet, but just so many things that we have seen from him. I mean, a lot of QBs even like him that are more, there's obviously the Hurts and those kind of quarterbacks that are their main thing that they bring to the table is their legs, and we hope that they can improve as passers, and we hope they can improve as how they're running the game and getting others involved. But the great thing about Herbert is that he first and foremost is a great passer, and he is a great quarterback. So I love that, but he also does add a bit of rushing into it as well. He has I believe he was top sort of, let me just check here, red zone carries. He was number 3 for quarterback. So they do let him rush in the red zone, which is lovely because you can always sort of get a few touchdowns there. He does add a little bit of rushing. It wouldn't surprise me to see that pick up a little bit. But I just think a lot of times, we see those QBs who come out, like Baker had a great rookie year, and then he kind of stepped back his sophomore year, and that happens a lot, where especially quarterbacks like Matt Ryan and stuff who are great passers, but they're not necessarily rushers. They'll come back and statistically take a little bit of a step back sometimes their second year, not major, but just a little bit of a back step, and then start moving forward again. Whereas we didn't really see that with Herbert, and that's what I love. His completion percentage was literally pretty much exact same. I mean, it was like less than a percent less, and his yards per attempt was a little bit higher than it was his rookie year. And all this was in the midst of a change. So it was a new head coach, a new scheme, a lot of things changing for him. So that to me is very encouraging. I think there's just a couple of throws of his that I've seen that I'm just like, I don't know how he does that. I mean, you see that with Mahomes. You see that with in that playoff game. You see that one where he kind of bends it around. I forget who it was, but the rusher had his arms up in the air, and he kind of managed to bend it under the arms of the guy through to the receiver. And you see some of these, especially one of my favorite deep ball throwers is Herbert. I just love when he just like cocks back and just launches it, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be great. So I'm a believer. I think the defense was pretty terrible this year, and that could tie into why he was throwing it so much and why, he had such a great year. So I could see that coming back a little bit if the defense gets a bit better, because Staley is a defensive minded, he was a DC before he was a head coach and stuff. So I could see that. But for me, I think what I love about him is that he offers that baseline of being a great thrower of the football. So I don't need him to be amazing on his feet to give me those points. So I'm happy with him at QB3, but I understand the concerns, and I understand people wanting to be a little bit, less positive on him.
I think he's got the. So go on, Liam.
I think that's a great point, though, is that we tend to see a dip in production when a quarterback goes to another scheme unless they are at that elite level. And Herbert never did that, and that's in his second year. That's quite insane to me. The only concern that I have for Herbert is maybe Lamar and Kyla get back to where they were or where we expect them to be. And specifically for Herbert, he loses Mike Williams this year, and he showed a real connection with Mike Williams. I'm not sure whether they're going to replace Mike Williams to the same extent that he has. But other than that, I mean, when you're talking about a quarterback or any player and saying, oh, he's losing his third best weapon on the offense, and that's the only concern I have for him, then you've got a great quarterback there. And I can't fault anyone for putting him anywhere between quarterback 5 and 3, to be honest.
I think as well, something that I always try and take into consideration, it's not the only thing. Obviously, it's not even necessarily the top 2 or 3 things, but with all these different players, quarterbacks especially, you want to look at like who is their coach, who is their GM, what is the organization like, and do you have, because it can all change, obviously we know that, but I really, really like Staley as a head coach. Like he's probably top 5 head coaches that I really like and I love his approach to the game. And he'll learn probably, and he'll change some things, but even his approach analytically, where he's like, I hate punting, I never want to punt and all that kind of stuff, that's good for fantasy, because if he's going to have him out there and he's going to be trying to go for it on any time where there's even a chance to go for it, again, that just ties into, that's a good thing for Herbert, because if he's in 4th and 3 and he's going for it or whatever, that sort of thing. So I think little things like that even can be taken into consideration when you're trying to rank these guys.
I think if we're talking just purely arm talent, to me, Justin Herbert has got the most arm talent of any quarterback I've ever watched. And I don't take that comment lightly.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a big comment.
By all means, you can throw out Aaron Rodgers, you can throw out Patrick Mahomes. To be honest, you can even throw out Jamarcus Russell, which I appreciate is ridiculous, but the guy had an absolute hose. But Justin Herbert, I have never seen anybody have the level of explosion when he throws the ball, but also the ability to, drop it into certain buckets, the touch on short throws, the ability to change arm angles. Like he basically combines the best of Mahomes with the best of Matt Stafford and is in this kind of freakish, melting pot. And
he's massive. He's so tall and big.
Huge, yeah.
I mean, he's got everything. That's what I like. He's got all these things. You're ticking all these boxes because he's massive. Because that's one of the knocks on Kyler's. He's small. Can he hold up and things? He's a massive dude. And as well as that, I don't know about you guys, but I've never seen him get rattled. He's just always so chill about everything. Just like, all right, cool, no worries. And it's just I love to see that in a quarterback.
My only concern is that projecting him forward, I think he is going to settle into that pocket passer mold. I don't think he is going to rush as much as he has done these last 2 years moving forward. And that might be me thinking back to, early 2000s quarterbacks of trying to create these perfect pocket passes. But I just think that he's the type of guy who has got that much arm talent and can win so much from the pocket. They don't need to risk the injury. And I don't think he needs to rely on that rushing ability. So for me, that's why I've got him at 5, because I just think that he's going to lose that rushing floor.
To me, if that is your approach and that is a conservative approach and you've still got him as quarterback 5, I think that says everything you need to know about the guy. But without absolutely harping on Herbert,
we should have our own Herbert episode.
Obviously. Exactly. We'll get you back on later in the off season.
Herbie.
So
part 1 of 3.
We'll have to do it. Talking about pocket passes, though, Tom Brady, QB 3 on the season. There's been talk this week about him retiring after the playoff loss. Where do you guys have him? So I'll come to you, Evan, first, because if he plays, he is a top 12 scorer, if not higher. If he doesn't play, which is a real possibility from the reports that are coming out, yes, it could be emotional. It's only been a couple of days since the loss to the Rams. If he does retire, that is a huge hit for any dynasty team, especially someone that's taken him in a startup.
Yeah, exactly. It's tough. Even we didn't really touch on it too much earlier, but even if that's true and Sean Payton really has retired, I mean, that just kind of gives you a moment of pause, doesn't it? Because he's one of those characters that you just sort of get used to. They're part of the furniture. You've grown up with them, you've grown up around them, and you just assume they're always going to be there. And I feel like we kind of thought Tom Brady was done 10 years ago, and he's kept proving us wrong. But as much as I doubted at times, he is human. And, I sort of think, the back of my mind, I sort of wonder whether he came back this year to try and win another Super Bowl, obviously. But he wanted to break that Drew Brees record. He wants all the records, he wants that. And he's now got that in his back pocket. And, you just sort of wonder what left is there. I mean, I know he's super competitive and, I think he has made comments before about wanting to play till he's 45 and stuff. So if this wasn't his last year, it's got to be very close to his last year. But I think you're right. There is, if he comes back, he's still going to be productive. He hasn't looked bad by any means this year. He looked amazing. He finishes QB3, QB4, like we said. So for me, it's very tricky. I think if you've got him, I'm probably just holding on to him and see how it goes, see how it shakes out, because you're probably not going to get much for him. And the risk of losing out on another year of him, you probably are a contender if you've got him, most likely. So you're probably best just to hold on to him. As far as acquiring, if it was a very cheap price and it's a super flex league, I would do it just to see. If somebody's panicked and they're yeah, I have him for a third, I'll be all right, sweet, I'll take the chance, and see what happens, because it's a 3rd round pick, to dart throughout the best of the time. So that's where I'm at, sort of. I wouldn't be, like you say, and if I was doing a startup, I would want him as my QB3 or 4. I wouldn't be building my empire around him. But I don't know, maybe you guys have some different info that I haven't seen yet.
Rich, we'll throw it over to you, mate, because he's going as the QB16 in current ADP. I think that's too high for a guy that you're probably getting a very massive push 2 seasons out of. Where do you stand on this?
I think you know, as the guy that sits here and says QB age is the most overrated aspect of Dynasty, it's hard for me to not be all in on Tom Brady. I think, look, for me, I'd happily go and buy him for possibly a late first in Superflex if I'm a contender. I think that there is absolutely no way that he's retiring. I think this is the most competitive man we have ever seen, and I don't think he's going out on the weekend's game. I think he's definitely back. I think that, you know, for me, next season he's going to be a QB1 again, and I guess it's how high do you value one season of QB1 production? And for me, you know, I settle in as that sort of late first. I'm doing an auction startup as we speak over the last few days, and he's just gone as the QB 17, which I was a little bit surprised at. But I think that for me, as I said, 1 year of QB1 production, I'm happy paying a late first as a contender, obviously.
So, Evan, just one question for you there. As you said, you if you take him, you're probably looking at getting a fourth quarterback. Are you looking at taking him around the QB 16 range and then getting 2 fairly late quarterbacks, so probably 24, 25 range? What's your strategy there?
Yeah, well, if it's a super flex startup, I definitely I lean towards the more QB heavy most of the time. I've done it the other way because, again, like, I'm just a weirdo. I do all sorts of things. I've tried like late round QB and start in super flex, and it's not fun. Like, honestly, I cannot recommend it. But saying that, yeah, I mean, in my dynasty rankings, Tom Brady's currently like QB 22. So I understand what you're saying. I respect it. And you could be very well right because he's proven us wrong so many times. But I don't know, man. I just, because I was thinking about it the other day. I was like, right. So Tom Brady is so competitive and he's such a, you know, this is an intense dude. So which makes more sense, right? Does he get to a Super Bowl, win his final Super Bowl and just ride out into the sunset that way? But then I'm like, I can't really see that happening because he's so competitive. I feel like if he won another Super Bowl, he'd be like, well, one more time. Let's do it one more time. You know, and it's like, I just, and I don't ever want to see him go the way of like Big Ben. I don't ever want to see him come back. And as much as I hate Tom Brady, like, don't get me wrong, like, absolutely despise all this the pain and agony that he put us through for years as a Patriot. He's so much more likable now in Tampa Bay, and I've kind of come around on him a bit, but I don't want to see that tarnish his record. And I don't think it would happen this year. I mean, he looked amazing, but I hope it doesn't ever get to that stage where he comes back one too many years and then he's just average or bad, you know?
Yeah. I agree. He's got so much more tolerable being a Buck. But we spoke about the next player quite a bit earlier on, so we're not going to take too long on this. But Patrick Mahomes was the QB4, QB6 in points per game. He had a rough start to the season. Rich, where are you drafted him at the moment? I know you've got Allen at 1, so I'm assuming 2.
Yeah, he's my 102 in Superflex formats. The guy's freak. He's, you know, one of the most talented players you've ever seen. We've talked. It feels like we've talked 5 or 6 times about the shift to this cover 2 shell and how teams have kind of slightly forced the Chiefs to adapt. And, you know, it feels like they're starting to get there. Obviously, we saw the Bills run a lot of cover 2 and cover 1 robber and that kind of thing on Sunday. And I think that the Chiefs are now in a position where they're almost solved it. And obviously, teams are going to come back with different schemes next year. But I do feel like Mahomes could be in for a truly monster year next year. I think he feels like he's back to the Mahomes of kind of 2 years ago.
And Evan, I mean, Patrick Mahomes having a down year and he's still being QB6 in points per game. How do you project him for the future years? Because you've got some big contracts coming up. Kelsey's quite old at this point. Are you worried about any of that, or are you just caution to the wind and just go for it?
Yeah. No, I mean, this is the thing, right? Is like the guys who wanted to doubt or hate on Mahomes were kind of dancing on his grave a little bit there in the middle of the season, saying like, oh, they figured Mahomes out and he's a fraud and all this kind of rubbish. And it's like, yeah, okay. You know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is. He's amazing. He's a special, you know, to kind of borrow from like Daniel Jeremiah's analogy of trucks and trailers. You know, he's definitely a truck. He elevates the play of those he plays with. I mean, for goodness sake, we've been thinking Byron Pringle's halfway decent these last few weeks, and that's because he's got Patrick Mahomes throwing him the ball. So no, I'm not worried about him at all. And I think Andy Reid's a really smart coach. So, you know, yes, Kelsey's getting a bit older and all that kind of stuff, but I'm pretty sure they can just find somebody on the waiver wire that they'll be able to plug in and make a tight end 5 or something on the year.
It wouldn't surprise me, but talking about haters, I'm pretty sure Evan is one of them. Aaron Rodgers was the QB5. He was drafted as QB12 in August ADP. So we'll throw it over to you, Evan, first. Where do you have Rodgers? Because he's heading into another offseason of complete mystery. No one really knows what's going to happen with him.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's it. You nailed it. I mean, he's such an enigma, isn't he? Like, he's so strange. He's such a strange character. Like, the way he gets on with his family and the way he gets on with his fans and the way he gets on with the media. He's just so strange. Like, he's so talented. He definitely is one of the premier passers, you know, of the last 10, 15 years for sure. 100%. But yeah, it's just so hard to know. It's so hard to know. Even those silly comments that he made after the game about not wanting to be part of a rebuild. And you're like, what are you talking about? This isn't a rebuilding team. You know, like, they're a very good team. Like, you guys have won more than any other team in the last couple of years, probably in the regular season. So I don't know. I think he just likes being center of attention, to be honest. I think he's a classic like narcissist who loves the spotlight, and I don't even know if he believes half the stuff he says sometimes. So it's hard to say. I mean, I still think he's, you know, a fantastic quarterback as obviously like we talked about, and he's not even as old as Brady. So, you know, I'm not as extreme as Rich, but I agree with Rich in the sense that like age is overrated when it comes to quarterbacks and things like that. You know, especially with Rodgers, now, don't get me wrong. I prefer if there's a younger option that I think, especially for me, I'm a big believer in Konami code quarterbacks. So if there's a younger option that has legs and stuff like that and likes to run, I'll err on that side. But for me in Dynasty, even for a startup, like Rodgers is just outside that top 12. But only because there's guys that are young, up and coming that I think are really talented that I'm really excited about. And if I'm starting out, I'd rather have, you know, somebody who's 22, 23, and I can just figure it out and build on that. Whereas if I'm a contender, Rodgers is definitely one of the top guys I'd love to have on my team next year.
So, Rich, where do you see him next year? Because he's gone up in ADP since August by 2 positions, so he's QB10 now. But I think his trade value has actually dropped, and it will continue to drop during the offseason until the season starts back up and we know where he's going to be. Where do you have him currently?
So I think he's my QB9 currently. I'm all in on Rodgers. I think he's my number one buy this offseason. I've said it in a couple of different places. I think, you know, if there is any dip in terms of price at the moment with people being uncomfortable around potential landing spots, then I'm absolutely scooping up. If I can have him as my QB2 in a Superflex league, I'm absolutely laughing. I think from my perspective, he is in a fantastic situation in Green Bay. You know, yes, we can talk till we're blue in the face about the second receiving option, and it seems that everybody talks about it. But if he returns in Green Bay, I think all of this talk is all about him trying to get leverage. And I think that there's, you know, no way that if he returns to Green Bay, Devontae Adams is going anywhere. And yes, I get that the cap situation isn't great for Green Bay at the moment. But I think basically what he's trying to do is he's trying to force the Packers to do something that they've never done and sort of mortgage future years and kick money down the road to win now. And I think that's all about this talk and everything. But even if he does leave, there is no way that Aaron Rodgers is going to a worse situation. If he does leave in free agency, he is going to go to a situation like a Pittsburgh, like a Denver, where he will have a better offense around him than he's got in Green Bay. So that's only a better situation. His value is only going to increase. So yeah, I'm all over him this offseason. I'm trying to pick him up. I've already got quite a few shares. I'm trying to pick up even more because if I can get him as my QB2, and you know, you're talking around that sort of late QB1 range, whether it be sort of people who got him in 10 to 15, I'm absolutely happy to pick him up in that value. I'd probably pay maybe 2 mid-firsts, maybe sort of a later 2022 and a future 2023 first for him right now. I think that's probably about the value that I've got.
I think his comment about not wanting to be a part of rebuild is exactly what you said, where he's basically saying that, not saying that he won't play, but he's trying to force the Green Bay front office to not go into a rebuild because they don't want to test him, basically. But talking about rebuilds, and this is a quarterback that came into a rebuild and within 2 years he turned it around. So Joe Burrow, QB6 on the year, QB9 in points per game. Evan, is he getting hyped up way too much with the playoffs? Is he getting that playoff bump, or do you have him ranked pretty highly, if not in the second tier, should we say?
Yeah, I think it's probably a both thing. I think it's probably both. I do think he's actually really special quarterback, but I do think he's probably getting even more hyped because of how the Bengals are doing in the playoffs, and it's a feel-good story, isn't it? And we love that. We love the underdog story. But yeah, no, I actually do think he's a very special player. I have him as my QB5 in Dynasty, so yeah, he's kind of a rung or two down from that top tier, but I mean, yeah, I just think he's the surrounding cast obviously is incredible. I love Jamar Chase, love T. Higgins, and Tyler Boyd is one of the best wide receiver threes you could possibly ask for. Joe Mixon's a great running back. They need to work on their offensive line, but I'm hoping they do that this offseason. Yeah, I mean, he's a really good, and it's interesting. I was listening to, do you guys know Jordan Palmer? He's like a famed kind of QB whisperer. He trains a lot of the guys in the offseason and things like that, or in the run up to their drafts and stuff. And he was talking about a couple different players, and he actually started talking about Burrow a little bit. And, he made a comment, and it wasn't an offhand comment, but it really struck me. And he said, he said to him, which obviously he lives and breathes quarterbacks, he sees them all the time. He's helped, train up some of the best quarterbacks we have. And he said for him, confidence is the most important attribute to a quarterback. And that's what he said. I mean, then he's the professional, not me. And he was saying it in context of, he was saying Josh Allen and Joe Burrow have that confidence. He's like, they literally believe they are the best quarterback in the planet right now. Nobody can stop them. And then you see that in their game, and I think Joe Burrow is that he believes in himself. He is so confident that especially his connection with Jamar Chase, he just believes that Jamar Chase is going to come up with those balls. So yeah, I absolutely believe in him. I believe in the talent, especially you got to think about, he's not athletic in the sense of like a Lamar Jackson or something like that. He's never going to rush for 1,000 yards, I don't think, but he's sneaky athletic. I think he does know when to use his legs. He's not afraid to use his legs. And I think just coming back from that horrific knee injury, you really saw him growing in his confidence down the stretch of the season. So I'd be really interested to see if their offensive line gets a bit better going into next year. He might actually even add a little bit with his legs, which would be great for obviously fantasy. But yeah, I'm all aboard the Joe Burrow hype. I mean, not as like the number one or number two, but absolutely, he's young, he's superstar. He's got an amazing surrounding cast, and I think he's brilliant. I do think he's a special talent.
Rich, throwing it over to you, he's currently going as the QB6. As Evan said, he's got a great supporting cast, and I think the unique thing about his situation is all of that cast contracted for at least 3 years. I think there might be an out in Mixon's contract in the next few years, just off the top of my head, but all of them are at least contracted for 2 to 3 years. If that kind of allows the Bengals to focus on the offensive line, and if that offensive line gets better, do you think that Burrow is going to climb your rankings?
Yeah, I could easily see it. I think I loved Evan's point there about the rushing ability. We saw it in his rookie year. He was rushing more. He only had 40 rush attempts this year. And I do think a lot of that is, coming off that injury. He said himself that he didn't really trust the knee fully until the middle of the season. And I do wonder if with another off season under his belt, we could see him get back to, he's never going to be Kyla, he's never going to be Lamar, and he's certainly never going to be Jalen Hurts. But if he can get into that sort of Aaron Rodgers, Justin Herbert range where he's adding, 4 or 5 touchdowns and maybe 100 rushing attempts, sort of 300-400 yards, that would be fantastic for his fantasy and certainly dynasty value. But let's be honest, the reason Joe Burrow has had the season he had is that he's the most accurate quarterback in the NFL. You just look at stats. He led the league in completion percentage. He led the league in percentage of catchable balls thrown. He led the league in completion percentage when under pressure. The guy between the years has got it. And I think that I'm very happy building any dynasty team around him as my QB1. You know, if I can get him as a QB2, then I'm absolutely delighted and loaded moving forward.
So moving on to Matthew Stafford as the QB7 on the year, QB10 in points per game. This is one of the biggest jumps we have in the top 12 in terms of ADP compared to performance. He went to the Rams this first year to the Rams, he got traded, and he produced the wide receiver one, which is Cooper Kupp, who is, for the first time from my point of view, I haven't been watching the NFL as long as either of you two in a lot of the community. I've been watching probably since 2013-ish. But this is the first the first wide receiver I can think of off the top of my head in those years that has seriously been considered as an MVP candidate, and if not, the top of that list. So, Evan, throwing it to you first. Matthew Stafford, do you think he's going to do this next year?
I don't see any reason why not. I really don't.
I mean, it's a big statement asking you if he's going to produce another wide receiver one, as in the wide receiver one. But as you said, I don't think there's any reason why he can't.
Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's very hard to do, and it'll be very hard for him to live up to what he did this year. But to me, it was like you saw that in that playoff game that we thought was so crazy, and it was like when crunch time came, who did he look for? It was Cooper Kupp, you know, and yeah, I just think Cooper Kupp is a really good receiver, and he's great at, you know, yards after catch, and he's exactly what you want if you're a Matthew Stafford, you know. So I'm a big Matthew Stafford fan, to be honest. I always loved Matthew Stafford. I love the gunslinger mentality, and I always sort of believed that. There was a lot of arguments, I think, for years over, like, because he never won a playoff game, you know, and it was like, well, is it he's not really as good as people make out, and he does make those stupid mistakes sometimes with the silly turnovers and the silly interceptions, or is it just that the surrounding cast wasn't good enough in the coaching and things? And I always erred towards the side of it's the cast and it's the coaching and things like that, but it's been nice to see it play out, you know, and it's been nice to see him actually have his best, well, I believe off the top of my head, I think it's like statistically his best you know, season in a lot of different categories for like completion percentage and things, at least best for a long time. You know, so it's definitely been really nice to see. And I think I'm a big Cam Akers fan. It's been miraculous to see him come back from Achilles this year. He didn't look great against the Bucs, but the Bucs have an amazing run defense, and it's like his second game back from an Achilles tear. So I think next year, if he's really solid and really had a great offseason and they can really establish the run game the way they want, I think it could be just as good, if not a better year for him, you know. And if Robert Woods is back healthy, things like that for Stafford. Yeah, the only knock on him, you know, obviously he's had his health concerns in the past, but he's a very tough dude. He's one of the toughest quarterbacks there is. And the only other thing will be the running, you know. Unfortunately, he is one of those classic sort of, he's like the dying breed of like elite pocket passers that just doesn't offer you much with rushing upside. So he needs those touchdowns to really stay high, but that always has been the case with the Rams, you know, under McVay. They do get a lot of touchdowns, and he's got a great cast there. I mean, if he can get Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Van Jefferson's come on a lot, you know, if OBJ comes back or whatever, signs a friendly deal, something like that. I mean, yeah, I think, again, he's sort of similar to Rodgers. I think he's just outside my top 12, only because I think we've been really blessed with like a lot of like really exciting young quarterbacks coming in, and a lot of them do use their legs. I think that's the modern game. So it's not a knock on him per se, but absolutely, I think he's going to have a couple more years. He's only 32, 33 years old, so he should have at least a couple more years, I would say. I mean, they seem really happy with him in LA.
Yeah, Rich, where do you fall with this? Because as Evan said, he makes those silly mistakes sometimes, but his value at the moment seems to be quite low compared to his finish. He's currently going as the QB 15. I know that I have him much higher than that, and I know that you, Rich, looking at your rankings, you've got him higher than that. Do you think he's massively undervalued right now because of his age?
Yeah, I think, I talked about it a bit with Tom Brady, that I think age is overrated, but I think Stafford's probably the number one kind of proponent of that. This is a guy that he's not sexy because he's not, Jalen Hurts, who's going to have 100-yard rushing games, and you can say, oh, he's only 23 and you're going to have him for the next 20 years. But would you be shocked if you had Matt Stafford as a solid kind of back-end QB1 over the next 3, 4, 5 years? Well, to me, if I can get production of a back-end QB1 for that many years, then I'm absolutely delighted. I think, if you can get him, you're saying QB 15 prices, I think that's an absolute bargain. I think he's the dream steady QB2 for my Superflex team. So I've talked about it a few times where if I'm going stable at QB2, then I'll go risky at QB3 and pump for that massive upside. Whereas if I go upside at QB2, I'll go stable at QB3. But I really like Matt Stafford. I think that, yes, we can talk all till we're blue in the face about the Rams and how they don't value draft picks and things like that. But actually, they're in a pretty good cap situation. They're up against the cap for next year, but they've got some easy moves they can make. Matthew Stafford's contract has got no dead money left, so they can easily restructure that and kind of take some money down the road. And I would be shocked to see them potentially, add to this kind of skill position weapons, whether that's they've got Robert Woods coming back next year, whether they could potentially, re-sign Odell or bring in somebody in free agency. I think that this offense could get even better next year rather than take a step back.
So you're not projecting your draft love of Tutu Atwell to be the wide receiver 3 next year?
I think that if Tutu Atwell's healthy and in the right role, then yeah, I think he could certainly add something to this offense.
You spoke about him and you referenced him, Rich. We'll come to you straight away. So Jalen Hurts, QB 8 on the season, QB 7 in points per game. As you put on the show sheet, he feels like a massive, huge risk, huge reward player who could go either way. The Eagles have 3 first-round picks this year. Has he shown enough that he's going to keep that franchise quarterback role, or at least the starter role for the next 2 years? And I think that would create massive dynasty value for him if he does.
I think for me, he's shown enough that he will be the starter somewhere. I think if the Eagles make a big move and go and get a quarterback, whether that's in the draft, via a trade or whatever, I wouldn't be shocked if Jalen Hurts suddenly gets moved and they move forward with Minshew as the QB2. I think that, as I said, he's huge risk reward. I think if you take him at his current cost, you could be sitting pretty and feeling very good that you've got a QB1 next year, or you could equally, he could completely blow up and offer you nothing. So it's a guy that I'm not particularly comfortable rostering at the moment. I don't think it's a good opportunity to go and sell because I think that his value is lower than that kind of potential production, but it's not a guy that I'm just comfortable with at the moment.
And Evan, I think he, to me, is the opposite of Matt Stafford. I know Rich touched on it, Matt Stafford being undervalued currently at ADP. I think Hurts is going as the QB7 in January ADP, so I would say that's way higher than I'd have him. Would you agree with that? Do you have him in your top 12 dynasty quarterbacks right now?
No, he's an interesting character. I have him. Let me just check. He's QB 15 for me. And yeah, I think it just purely comes down to, I think it's sort of very much along the lines of what Rich was saying. I think that in dynasty, in fantasy football, we get excited because, there's maybe 15, 16, 17 quarterbacks that we're like, hey, we can get decent production weekly out of blah, blah, blah. But we forget that there's like 32 teams in the NFL, and in real life NFL, I think he's definitely proven that he's good enough to be a starter somewhere, or that at least I would say, let me rephrase that. There's at least teams that would certainly take a chance on him being their starter compared to what they were running out every week. I mean, Washington football team comes to mind, like there's definitely several teams. The Steelers are going to be looking for a quarterback. Not that they want Jalen Hurts as their quarterback, but I'm saying if he was all of a sudden available, or if he was a free agent, or if he was on the market, then there's definitely teams that would come knocking. So he's certainly better than a lot of the other options out there. So I think from that perspective, unfortunately, I'm not QB7 high on him, just because I think there is a solid 12, 13, 14 QBs that are talented quarterbacks and offer rushing upside. He offers the rushing upside. We're yet to see if he's a talented quarterback. So if it's that prices and I have him, I'm happy to sell at that price. If I can get, for me, if you're saying he's a QB7, I mean, that's Lamar Jackson territory for me. So if somebody wants to give me Lamar Jackson and a little something for my Jalen Hurts or whatever, then I'm absolutely 100% happy to do that. So that's where I would sort of come down with it. I definitely don't think I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, he's rubbish and, you're wasting your time and he's going to be out of the league in a year or two. But at the same time, I'm not convinced that he's, the next elite top 5 QB. It's yet to be seen, but that's where I would land.
Yeah, I think with Jalen Hurts, I think it's coming off recency bias with how good he has been for fantasy in the season. As we move into the offseason, I think his price will drop a lot more. And speaking about price drops and who's going to actually benefit from that, Dak Prescott finishes the QB9, sorry. And I think he's going to benefit from that. So I've got him as my QB7. So obviously when Hurts goes down, you would expect anyway Dak to be the next QB7. So Evan, where do you stand on Dak? Because at the start of the season he was in that top 5 tier, and people were taking him anywhere between 3 and 5. I think was the most common area that I saw him. So do you still have him in that range, especially with what you would, which is crazy to think, but what you kind of consider a down year for him, especially with that offense and those weapons?
Yeah, I've had a good long think about it actually, because I am a big Dak fan for the last few years. I've always been a big Dak guy. Not that I'm a big Cowboys fan, but I just like Dak. I like him as a person. I like his story, But yeah, for me, I've sort of held firm at the minute. I'm at QB6, so I'm kind of splitting the difference. I'm not putting him in the top tier, top shelf or anything, but I'm not dropping him down to like QB 10 or 11. I think that's a very high powered offense. Obviously, I think it's yet to be seen. I don't think, this is going to settle well with Jerry, the way that they just bombed out of the playoffs again. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I wonder, if there's going to be a change at the head coaching position or not. But yeah, I mean, for me, my biggest concern for Dak actually, surprisingly, is the rushing. Like we've talked about, it's he used to be a real rushing quarterback. He definitely added a really safe floor for his rushing upside. And unfortunately, this year it's, other than his injury year, it's his least rushing attempts, his least rushing yards, by far his least yards per carry, and he only gave you 1 rushing touchdown. So it's kind of like a lot of his safe floor is gone a little bit. And so when they have those games where maybe they're just beating up on teams and Zeke and, Pollard are getting the ball a lot, he's maybe not doing as much for you as you would have liked. But then again, he also has those blow up weeks where he gives you the 4 touchdowns and, they just absolutely go out and smash it. So I'm sort of holding firm. I'm in the middle, like I'm happy with him. I still think he's a very good quarterback, real life quarterback. So that helps him. He's definitely not old by any stretch of the imagination. So absolutely, for me, it'll be one where we wait and watch and see what the market does. If people are really out on him and they're building this narrative that he's just rubbish now or something weird, then I'll absolutely be buying him and adding more Dak shares. But if for some reason the hype starts building again and everyone's like, actually, wait a second, he's QB3 or something, then I'll probably be selling at that price.
What about you, Rich? Because Dak at the moment, I think he's basically perfect. As I said, QB7 for me. He's currently going as QB8. Do you still have him in that elite tier of I suppose it could be seen as a top 2 or a top 3 tier of the top 6 that we've spoken about mostly already? Do you have him just outside that range, or?
Yeah, so he's fallen out the top 6 for me. I think he's the next man up, but I think that he's just, he didn't perform as from a fantasy perspective as we'd hoped this year. Evan's point about the rushing upside, I think again it could potentially link back to that injury, and obviously he didn't have the most steady preseason camp with his shoulder issue, and I think that, again, I don't know whether I'm holding out hope, but I think that rushing element should come back again this year. I think that offense takes a step forward when he offers that rushing potential. I don't think he's ever going to get back to what he was, but I do wonder if next year he settles into kind of halfway in between this year and the year before as such. But I think that offense, everybody knows that I love the receiving weapons in that offense, and I think that it's going to be great for fantasy. And I think that if Dak's at the helm, I trust him to deliver the ball and put up stats. But I just have those 6 elite guys just ahead of him.
I think Dak is very similar to Burrow in the aspect that he had that injury last year and he's kind of coming back from it and he's trying to work through it. And as you said, Evan and Rich on Burrow, I think it's going to be very similar for Dak in the aspects of a rushing attack. But I don't think he's ever going to get anywhere close to where we see the next player on the list, Kyla Murray. He finished as the QB 10 on the season. However, he was the QB 4 in points per game. Rich, I'm coming to you first because you've put a question in the show sheet of can he play a full season? And I want you to take this one away.
I feel like I've stitched myself up. I think basically if Kyler Murray stays fit, he is dynamite for fantasy. And everybody's seen that. And when healthy, it feels like he'd be pushing that top 2 tier. And he'd be challenging Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes for that QB1 spot. But I'm really concerned that we've now seen it. Is it 3 years on the trot that he's got that injury, that niggly injury mid-season, and his production has plateaued. Yes, he takes fantastic care of himself when he's rushing with the ball, and he does avoid those big hits, but he still seems to consistently get injured. And for me, that's the only thing that's stopping him kind of being in that elite tier. I think that for me, I'm happy taking the risk because I think over the next few years he will settle down. But I am concerned. I just want people to know I'm happy taking him as my QB3 overall, but it is a risk because you are playing with the injury factor as such.
How about you, Evan? Because I've got Kyler and Lamar as kind of like a coin flip 3 and 4, so I've got Lamar just ahead. I know that you mentioned earlier that Lamar was QB7 for you. So where do you have Kyler? And I suppose where I'm going with this is, do you see Lamar being very close to him or not? Because both me and Rich have got him very close.
So I've got Kyler at QB4 and then Lamar at QB7. So I've got Burrow and Dak between the two. Dak, just because I think Dak is a better passer and stuff like that than Lamar, so I think he's a better, all-round quarterback. And Joe Burrow is similar. I think he's incredibly intelligent. I mean, from everything I've heard, he's just such a smart guy, the way he understands things and the way he reads the game and understands the game. And then we talked about, that confidence factor. Kyler is just amazing what he does on his feet, and you've got to give him that. But I think he also, thankfully, is fairly accurate as well. He's quite a good passer, and I think I've seen a little bit of progression from him in those areas as well. I honestly wonder, part of it for me is I wonder how much of this is a Cliff Kingsbury problem. I do wonder that. I'm not sold on Cliff Kingsbury being a great coach. I mean, I don't get it. I don't really get it. I mean, and to be fair, halfway through the season, I was sort of willing to hold up my hands and be okay, I was wrong. He's obviously a great coach. Look how good they are. But look how they fell apart in the second half of the season. And a great coach knows how to make adjustments. And, even to be honest, I feel like, why take Rondale Moore if you're not going to use him? If you're not going to use him when you need creativity, when you're dying for creativity, when your quarterback isn't as mobile as he could be, and you've got a player who's insanely fast, great at yards after the catch, why are you not using him more than just as a gadget player, especially when you're missing DeAndre Hopkins? And I don't know. I just find all of it very strange. I think part of it is a Cliff Kingsbury problem. So I'm pretty happy with him as QB4. I do have a little bit of concern, like Rich said, with the injuries that keep cropping up a little bit, but he's definitely a really nice blend of elite rusher, very good passer as well. He's not as good as some of the guys that we have up there, but that's why he's QB4, not QB1 or 2. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with Kyler overall, especially if Cliff Kingsbury gets the heave ho. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, so let's move on. And I've lumped the next 2 quarterbacks, so the quarterback 11 and 12, in a tier of their own kind of thing, because they were both quarterbacks that were drafted pretty late and then have jumped up inside the top 12. So Kirk Cousins, the Vikings quarterback, Evan, I'm not going to ask for your opinions of him quite yet. I'm sure that most Viking fans have a good opinion of Cousins, or lengthy opinion, shall we say. And then Wentz, Carson Wentz, I mean, people slated him all through the season because of a poor season. And yeah, he wasn't brilliant, but from a fantasy point of view, he's a quarterback 12. He was the quarterback 16 in points per game. So Evan, we'll start with you. How do you feel about both of these quarterbacks going forward? Because they're both the kind of take late and you'll get some production out of them type of quarterbacks. They're not like the young quarterbacks that you'll probably see go ahead of them. Yeah.
I mean, where are you checking? So just out of curiosity here, because when I look at things, like I'm seeing Wentz as a QB 15 when I look at like Fantasy Pros and stuff like that. So where did you see him as QB 12? Because I didn't think he finished as QB 12.
I'm taking my stats from Dave Wright's spreadsheet, so okay. I will check on him. I think
I just checked on. Yeah, I just was because I looked up on one of my sleeper leagues while we were talking there, and he was QB 14, and then on Fantasy Pros he was QB 15, so he was a little bit outside that QB 12. But anyways, it's probably splitting hairs. To be fair, I'm just a little bit anal about stuff like that. But no, I'm not a big Wentz guy. I was a little bit like, okay, I can understand the thought process of him going back to his old coach, where he had the best production, things like that. And it had its okay moments, but like obviously the spectacular meltdown there at the end of the season wasn't ideal. And I'm worried about just, the way that the general manager and the way that the head coach aren't even coming out and like fully committing to him for next year, even though it would make a lot of sense for them to, because they've kind of given up a first round pick for him. So you sort of would think they would have to commit to him at least for another year, whereas they've been a little bit like non-committal, and they both strike me as the type of men that they're not really these like shyster, like, used car salesmen, like say one thing and mean another. They kind of seem like the kind of people that come out and just say what they mean and just stick with it. So the fact that they're kind of equivocating about whether or not he's the dude next year makes me a little bit worried. So I'm not huge fans. Needless to say, I'd probably be higher on Cousins than I would on Wentz. I don't like Kirk Cousins personally as a Vikings fan, just because I don't think he has the it factor. I think he's puts up some good stats for fantasy, and I just don't think he's elite. I think he's just one of those guys that if he gets in the right situations, he can put up some good figures. He is an accurate passer, and so I think he'll be around for a few years still, definitely. So I think in Superflex, he's a great QB2 to have for sure. QB2, QB3, and he's always undervalued for what he actually does produce, it seems like. But Carson Wentz, I wouldn't want him as personally more than a QB3 or 4 in a Superflex league. That's where I'm at.
I think your point is interesting about the top 12 quarterbacks, because when I just had a quick look, I noticed that Tannehill is the quarterback 12 in a 4-point touchdown league that I'm in. So you could also lump him in this tier as well of unsexy starter and potentially even QB2 range. Rich, I know that you think, I think that you have these guys all in the same tier essentially, or have the same view on them, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, they're just, you've pretty much hit the nail on the head, aren't you? They're that unsexy that, they're probably going to give you 16 starts. They're not injury prone. They tend to be pretty reliable in that aspect. And you never feel particularly great starting them, but they're never going to completely, maybe, yes, both of them will have 1 or 2 weeks a year where they'll completely implode. I think I'm probably a little bit more bullish than you, Evan, by the sounds of things, from Wentz being the starter in Indianapolis perspective. I think given the fact that they've paid that draft capital to go and get him, with his contract situation, I don't see them paying him if they cut him, they're still paying him 15 million, or if they keep him on the roster, paying him almost 30 million. I can't see a team that's paid, what was it, a first and was it a second or a third plus 30 million to do anything but start the guy. So I'm comfortable with them in that sort of QB 23, QB 24 range. It is what it is. But that concludes the kind of top 12. But Evan, thank you ever so much for coming on, and apologies for running a little bit longer than initially planned. But
that's my fault.
You never apologise. And for those that were listening, where can the listeners find you? Where can they read your work?
I do some stuff. I do rankings for Dynasty Nerds. I do some writing stuff usually in the off season, and I have my own podcast, Dynasty Debates. So we do a weekly show, have a lot of different cool guests on, just talk about different things. We just talk to running backs, and we're going to be diving into prospects again soon. That'll be exciting. But yeah, that's where you can catch me on Twitter at FFEvanLucian, like we said at the top there. Usually just talking crap and being silly and stuff like that. I do put some analysis and stuff out there on Twitter, but I find a lot of people are, can be quite aggressive and angsty and stuff on Twitter. So I try to just have fun and be positive and be chilled out about stuff on Twitter. More my actual analysis, usually my articles or my podcasts and stuff.
I find it hard to believe that you think people are angsty and up for debate on Twitter. It's I've never experienced that in my life. Yeah. Liam, before we go, did you want to give the little plug about the Listener League?
I did, yeah. So the Listener League, I've been tagged in it, asking what's going on, because I was meant to put the Google form for new signups out about 2 weeks ago, and I've just been waylaid. So that will be going out this week. If you're listening to it before Wednesday, it'll be going out Wednesday. And if you're listening after that, then it's already out. Go and have a look. So all you need to do is give us your sleeper username, and we'll do some sort of randomized draw, and we'll pull names out of a hat or something. And we'll get 5 new Dynasty managers in our Listener League. And then from there, you'll have a lot of off-season stuff to do. We've got player locks. We'll have the consolation draft, dispersal draft. That's the word I was looking for, dispersal draft. And then obviously the rookie draft as well. And you'll be able to trade throughout the year, because Rich hates trade deadlines. So, Rich, that is my plug. Over to you.
Perfect. So thank you so much again for Evan for coming on. It's been fantastic. That concludes our Positional preview series. We'll be back next week. We're going to start with a gentle introduction into some college players. We're going to get the guys over from the 5 Yard College pod. They're all going to be jumping on, and we're going to be introducing the Big 12 names. But thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again next week.